Hello, I'm Dennis Tucker. I'm a preacher of Lilac Church Christ. This is a lesson that's going to deal with a subject matter I think is very needed today. And it's one that is about consistency. A number of years ago, I preached a series of lessons about what is needed in religion. And I mentioned some things such as what's needed is the idea of respect for God's authority, of having the authority for what we're doing in the name of God and name of religion. Also, godly zeal. We need to be zealous in our service to God and seeing the big picture. And those kind of things, the intellectual honesty, all those were part of the subject matters I talked about. And in the last couple of Sundays, I've preached lessons about choices and consequences. And the fact that when we make choices, there are often results and consequences of those choices. And last Sunday, I talked about differences that makes a difference. I was looking through the Bible about various points of application to that. And so this lesson here, though, I got thinking about this need for consistency. And as I was thinking about consistency, I decided to look up the definition on dictionary.com. Where else would I go? And it gives me the following definition. The first definition says a degree of density, firmness, viscosity, such as the liquid has the consistency of cream, as an example gave there. And I thought, that really isn't what I'm talking about here. That doesn't seem to be applicable to this lesson. The second definition says steadfast adherence to the same principles, course, form, compatibility, especially correspondence to or uniformity. I guess to get my definition there. Let me read that second one again. Steadfast adherence to the same principles, course, form, such as the consistency and pattern behavior. And then third definition said agreement, harmony, or compatibility, especially correspondence or uniformity among the parts of a complex thing, such as all the rooms in the house are the same color. They are consistently the same color. And as I was thinking about the three definitions, that second and third one seem to be the ones I'm talking about here in the sense of adherence to the same principles. Now, let me give you kind of a couple of some facts here, about three facts I think we all can agree with. Fact number one is sometimes bad people do good things. And sometimes even a bank robber can do something nice. Even a bank robber can still love his or her mom, for instance. And sometimes a liar can still tell the truth. That it's not that they lie all the time. And so we think about that. And there's people in the Bible that when I look at them, I realize, okay, they did something good, but they were really bad. They were not consistently good. For instance, Balaam in the Old Testament. Balaam was a prophet that Balak, the king, sent to bring Balaam to curse Israel. And when his envoy came to Balaam, in Numbers 20, second chapter, verse 12, God said to Balaam, you shall not go with them, you shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. So Balaam rose in the morning and said to the princes of Balak, go back to your land, for the Lord has refused to give me permission to go with you. Now, he did the right thing there. He actually did something good. Now, as you go on in the story, you find that that he wasn't consistently good, because the next time God says don't go and unless they ask you, and he actually goes on his own. And he winds up actually cursing Israel in a sense there. And so as you think about Balaam, he was not a godly person, although on this one occasion he did something right. In fact, 2 Peter 2 verse 15, in describing Balaam, he said, they have forsaken the right way, gone astray, fallen the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wage of unrighteousness. And so he's not a good person here. That he may have done something good, but he was not really a good person. And as you think about that, the second fact is that even a good person can sometimes do something bad. And that is that none of us are perfect. A Christian can yield to temptation, can sin. When we read in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. That means that even the most devout Christian has to be careful, because they can sin against God. They can give in to temptation. As a Christian can get angry and maybe sin in that way. Ephesians 4, verse 25. It said, for therefore putting away lying, let each of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members one another. And in Ephesians 5, verse 15 says, where when you walk circumspectly, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. When he said you walk circumspectly, what that means is carefully aware. And the reason is because, again, there are trials, there are temptations, maybe the anger comes along and somebody gives in and says something they shouldn't say or do something they should not do. And so we look at that and we may realize, well, that person really lost it right there. But then when somebody said, well, are they a good person or not? We may look and say, well, that's not their manner of life, actually. That's not what they're consistently doing. That is simply an anomaly. That's a departure from the normal course of action. And so we look at that and realize, okay, even a good person can do something bad. And we have an example of that with Peter. And I'm not talking just about the fact that Peter denied Jesus 3 times on the night that Jesus was on trial. But I'm talking about the fact that Peter, later on, that we read about him in Galatians 2nd chapter, verse 10. And this here deals with the Gentiles as they were obeying the gospel. And Peter actually had gone to the house of Cornelius in Acts, early in Acts, 10th chapter, and preached to Cornelius' household and had baptized them. And when we go in Acts 11th chapter, we find that they questioned Peter about that, they being the Jews in Jerusalem that obeyed the gospel, questioned Peter about that. And Peter stood up for the word of God and actually said that he did what God said to do. But yet over in Galatians 2nd chapter, verse 10, that Paul there says this, they desire only that we should remember the poor, the very thing which I was eager to do. Now when Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were the circumcision. And the rest of the Jews, who also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away by his hypocrisy. And so here's the case here that Peter had actually preached the first, what we ought to say, the first Gentile converts. He baptized them, and yet on this occasion, whenever, and apparently Peter didn't have a problem of being around Gentiles until this one occasion here, when some Jewish brethren came in, and then all of a sudden he pretended like he didn't have anything to do with the Gentiles, and Paul calls them on that. Now we look at Peter and realize that Peter was an apostle. He was an elder in the Lord's church. He is one of the priests of the gospel, one of those priests of the gospel day of Pentecost, not the only one, but he's one of those priests of the gospel day of Pentecost. And we would say about Peter's life, we say, well, generally, Peter was a good person. Peter was a faithful member of the Lord's church. And so we look and see, even good people sometimes can do something bad. And the third fact is that we recognize consistency when we see it, and we recognize it when we don't see it. That when I look at somebody and I maybe see the fact of their consistency in serving God. For instance, when I look at Daniel, if I look in Old Testament, Daniel, 1st chapter, and verse 8, Daniel there was actually instructed to eat of the king's delicacies. I think is how that verse actually reads. And Daniel would not. Now, apparently some of the things on the table was forbidden by the law of Moses. And Daniel said, no, I will not do it. And it worked out fine. I mean, it worked out where Daniel was actually prospered, did well because of that. And then you go on in the book of Daniel, we find that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in chapter 3, we have the king actually makes an image and wants everybody to bow down to the image and worship it as they're playing some instruments of music. And verse 12 on down, you find that the charge made against these 3 men was that they're not bowing down to this image. And when they were given the opportunity to do so before the king, they said no. They were consistent in that. We are not going to bow down. And then you go on Daniel, in Daniel's 6th chapter, that Daniel, at that time, a decree was issued that prayer can only be made towards the king. And Daniel was praying towards Jerusalem. He winds up in the lion's den. Now, as I look at those passages, I see consistency. I see that they were determined to do what God said to do. And as you think about that, there's also some people in the Bible I look at, and I see that they were inconsistent. And one of those, King Saul. And there were times in the life of King Saul, Saul did something good. But Saul was inconsistent. There's times he recognized David as being righteous, but then he persecuted David. There's times he wanted to serve God, but then other times he just rebelled against God. So he's inconsistent in his life. And so we recognize that. Just as whenever I look around at people around me, I may see where they're consistent or they're inconsistent. And we are tempted when they're inconsistent to say they're hypocrites. Okay, so those things are some facts about consistency. When I think about consistency, one of the passages stands out in my mind that we're going to apply in this lesson is 1 Corinthians 9th chapter, verse 24 through verse 27. a well-known passage that Paul talks about and compares the Christian life in essence to an athlete in training. In verse 24 he says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may attain it, and everyone who competes for the prize is tempered in all things. Now they do to attain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight not as one to beast the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I preach to others, I myself shall become disqualified." And as you look about this idea of an athlete in the way Paul's talking about here, I think that's a good illustration as far as consistency. When we look at athletes today, maybe you're looking at a really great golfer, or maybe a basketball player that shoots his free throws really well. You look and you find they have this routine. And they have this routine. Now, I remember when I was growing up, or actually when I was in school at UK, we had a basketball player there by the name of Kyle Macy. And Kyle Macy was known as an excellent free throw shooter. There was one year he shot like 93% free throws. And the thing about him was that whenever he shot a free throw, he went through the same routine every time. As far as getting to the line, he did the same things. He shot the ball the same way. He had built a consistent routine. And the same thing about most athletes, that they learn a routine and they stay with it no matter what happens around them. And so as you think about this here, now, how do we obtain that consistency? Okay, one thing that I was looking here, and another word we could use for consistency is faithfulness. But one thing I notice here is that we have to act and set the responsibility for our actions. When Paul talks about buffeting his body, and you look in the Bible, we find that setting responsibility means that we understand that even the little things we do can have results, and they add up to big things. And then, for instance, over in Matthew 25, verse 21 says, "The Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I'll make you rule over many things. Enter the joy of your Lord." Now, you start thinking about that parable there, parable of the talents, and you realize he said to those who are the few things, we may be tempted to say the small things. Now, in one sense, there are really no small things in the service of God. I mean, what would you classify as a small thing in service to God? What would you say there? I don't think we would say it was being a good neighbor or being a good husband and being a good wife. I don't think we would say a small thing is reading our Bible. But apparently there are some things they look at. He said few here, and so we look at that and we see that even those few things, even though what we may be tempted to say are small, we need to treat with responsibility. Jay Rice, a football player, I think he's in the Hall of Fame now, wide receiver, San Francisco 49ers, was one time asked about the fact that his helmet was always polished and his cleats were always clean and his uniform was always immaculate. And he took care of those things himself because he said they mattered. They made him play better. That even the small things like that, you would think that a professional athlete. And I'm sure there was equipment managers that would have done those things for him, but he was taking care of even those small things. And it says something about his character, it says something about what he was doing and how seriously he took his job. And so again, what a small thing in service to God? Well, how would you think a small thing? Even what you would consider to be small, accept responsibility for what you're doing there. And maybe it's a question to ask yourself, for instance, somebody, as far as being ready to give an answer. The Bible says we need to be really ready to give an answer for the defense of the gospel. The reason for the hope within us, 1 Peter 3rd chapter. And so the question may always be one to answer, like, what are you doing? That's a simple responsibility. Somebody asks, what are you doing? Or another, where are you? And who are you with? And again, those are questions. Maybe another question about what authority are you doing these things? Where in the Bible can you find that authority? And so responsibility, accepting responsibility means that we are accountable for what we've done or we're doing. We're willing to accept that accountability. The signs I'm sure many of us have seen in the store that says basically you break it, you buy it. What that sign says is you are accountable for everything. Okay, the second thing is practice discipline in every area of your life. Again, when Paul's talking here about the idea of the athlete, the athlete, the serious athlete, is always an athlete. That they are realizing everything they do, it affects their ability to perform in whatever their endeavor is, whether it is in track and field, whether it's in football, whether it's basketball, whatever the sport may be, that everything they do affects that area of their life. Now, sometimes people are good at compartmentalizing their lives. Now, I understand that we have different roles we play. That is, we are husbands and wives, and we're fathers and sons, and we're daughters and moms, and not only that, but that we are workers and we have other roles in life here. But what I mean by compartmentalize, some people compartmentalize such as, this is my secular life and this is my Christian life. This is my religious life and this here is the rest of my life. And we act as if those things are totally independent of one another. And they're not. They're not. Everything you do, you are to do as a Christian. That's consistency. When we start thinking about that, in Colossians 3, verse 17, it says, whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And what does that mean? Well, it means that whenever I do something, if I go to a ball game, I need to act as a Christian would act there. And sometimes, ball games, people get really riled up and really enthused or really upset with the refs, or and they start saying things they shouldn't. I need to act as a Christian. Whenever it means that when I go to work, I need to act as a Christian. I need to watch the kind of language I use, or watch my attitude. And every area of my life, I need to be as a Christian would work in his job. In fact, Ephesians 6 chapter, verse 5, and it talks about bondservants, which would be slaves, but today we would say employees. He says, bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart, as to Christ, not with eye service as to men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is slave or free. And what's what he was saying there? He's saying, okay, you're a slave, and you go and you serve your master, and you serve him whether he's looking at you or not looking at you. You serve him where if he's around the corner peeping at you, he's going to see the same thing as if he's right there beside you. And same thing as far as in our work today. When you go to work, that you need to be doing your job, you need to be doing your best, you need to be the best employees you can be. And he goes on, talks about the bosses, by the way, about the masters, and about how they treat their slaves, and those in position of authority in workplaces need to act as a person of position of authority. That's a Christian, that's serving a God. When you go on vacation, you need to act as a Christian. Vacation is not a time to take off from being Christian. And so whatever recreational activities we're involved in there, we need to be acting as a Christian would. That's consistency. I don't know where I read this a number of years ago, but it was a kind of a story making a point here, and ask the question, can a person be, and that's a number of things, can a person be a teacher and be a Christian and go to heaven? Can a person be a policeman and a Christian and go to heaven? Can a person be, and he gave out 4 or 5 other type of examples of some kind of job, and always and be a Christian and go to heaven. And then the next paragraph says the answer to those questions is no. And I remember giving this invitation one time, using that, and everybody perked up. Everybody perked up at me and said, wait a minute, I can't be a teacher and go to heaven? No, that's why I was saying, the point the article making, the next paragraph says, you can be a Christian and be a teacher and go to heaven. You can be a doctor and be a Christian and go to heaven. You can be whatever the occupation is, but the first thing you have to do is be a Christian. Be a Christian, and whatever endeavor in life you are in, and you can go to heaven. And so that is the idea of consistency here, of always act as a Christian. The third thing is all the time. And that is part of what we already talked about here. But discipline here is a full-time thing. Faithfulness is full-time. You can't be partly faithful. You're either faithful or you're not faithful. And so, it's, again, comparing this to maybe going on a diet and exercising. You only get benefit of both those things if you do them on a consistent basis. If you decide, for instance, and I've been guilty of this in times past, especially if I know I watch what I eat, and so I will, watch what I eat for a little while, and then I get tired of it, and then I splurge. Or I exercise, and then I would quit for 2 or 3 days, or 4 or 5 days. And you realize you're not going to get any benefit of those things. The only way you get benefit of those things is if you do them on a daily basis, if you are consistent with those things. And that requires a lot of discipline, a lot of self-discipline. And so consistency means, as a Christian, that you don't take days off. And you don't say, I'm tired of doing this. I'm tired of whatever it is, maybe reading my Bible. I'm tired of praying. I'm tired of helping my neighbor. I'm tired of watching what I say. I'm tired of going to services, and so I'm going to take some time off. That's not consistency. There are certain religious practices, I would call that, where a person says, okay, I'm going to sin, and then tomorrow I'm going to be holy. I'm going to really go out there on kind of like the old adage, go out there on Saturday night and live like a child of the devil, and then Sunday morning I'm going to be like a child of God. There's inconsistency there. We have to be consistent in our life. And that means then daily do things such as read the Bible. Daily pray to God. Daily be thankful. Daily think of others. Daily do good things. That is consistency. And finally, consistency requires us to act with a purpose. And you see, an athlete trains with a purpose. That is, they have a goal in mind, and they are training to attain that goal, to attain whatever that purpose may be. And sometimes people say, well, I have a goal, I have purpose, but then they do things that are totally inconsistent with their goal, their purpose. And maybe the idea of the person that says, okay, my goal is I want to get a good education. I don't go to college. I don't get a good education. I don't get my degree. And then you look and say, okay, they enroll in classes, but you know what? They don't go. Okay, is that really consistent with your goal? And maybe they don't buy the book. Or maybe they basically don't really study as they should. All those things are going to hinder them from attaining their goal. So when we act, we need to think about, okay, does this help me or hurt me as far as my goal? And my goal should always be the idea of honestly going to heaven and trying to help others go to heaven also. Whether it is my children, whether it is my spouse, whether it is my brother, sister in Christ down the pew from me, whether it's my neighbor, it needs to always be to go to heaven and help others go also. And so as a Christian, I need to think before I act. In Hebrews 12, verse 1, it said, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is before us. Now, the weight that easily ensnares us, I believe the Hebrew writer here has a specific thing in mind, but we can think about this in a sense of, okay, does this decision here, is this going to actually help me attain my goal, or is it going to be a hindrance to me? Is it going to be a stumbling block to me, or is it going to help me attain my goal? And we just need to think about that, because a lot of times, again, decisions are made. People say, I decided to do this, and it makes me scratch my head because I'm thinking, how does that help you go to heaven? How's that going to help you attain your goal of going to heaven? And a lot of times they don't. And so we need to think about that. And so just as in the talk about marketing, there's impulse buying. Sometimes people make impulse decisions, impulse sins, and that hinders us from attaining our goals. So let's lay aside every weight that entangles us or hinders us. And so run with endurance the race that's set before us. And so these things are involved in the idea of consistency. I just kind of want to go to a parable. It's a well-known parable, a parable called the Good Samaritan. And most of us are aware of this parable. And in Luke 10th chapter, I'm going to read here starting verse 27. And that a question comes up as far as the greatest command. And in verse 27, Jesus, or man answered, said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." That's the Samaritan answer. And he said to him, Jesus talking about there, "You have answered rightly, do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Then Jesus answered said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves. They stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road. When he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise the Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was. And when he saw him, he had compassion. For he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, said to him, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among thieves? And he said, He who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. One of the things I see about this parable, and I understand the point that the parable making there, is that this Samaritan was treating this man as his neighbor, and the neighbor is whoever we come across. The neighbor is everybody. But one of the things I see in this parable is also the fact that the Levite and the priest were men who proclaim to love God and be following God, and yet they were inconsistent. They did not actually do what the law of God said, to love your neighbor as yourself. We need to be consistent in our lives where people can look and say, that is a Christian, that's a faithful person of God, and they know that because we are consistently acting as a Christian. That needs to be what we're doing in our life. I appreciate you watching this, and again, if you can come be with us at Lilac Road, Church of Christ building is located at 1687 Lilac Road, Litchfield, Kentucky. Sunday mornings, Bible class at 9:30, worship at 10:25, and then Sunday at 5 p.m. I'll get it right here a minute. At 5 p.m. we have worship. Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. we have Bible classes also. But if you feel free to share this on YouTube or however you can share this, and also hit the like button and come and be with us. If you can, feel free to ask any questions. Also, in response to this lesson or any other lesson. I do appreciate you watching.